20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Chapter 9, Ned Land's Temper. I have no idea how long we slept, but it must have been a long time, for afterward we felt completely rested. I woke up first. My companions had not yet moved, and were still stretched out in their corners like inert objects. I had scarcely gotten up from this somewhat hard bed when I felt my mind clearing, my brain returning to normal, so I once again began carefully examining our cell. Nothing had been changed in the cabin itself. The prison was still a prison, and the prisoners still prisoners. The steward, however, had cleared off the table while we were asleep. There was therefore nothing to indicate that our situation would change in the near future, and in all seriousness I asked myself if we were destined to live indefinitely in this cage. This thought seemed all the more painful, for although my mind was free from the obsessions of the day before, I felt as if there were a weight on my chest. I found it difficult to breathe. The air felt heavy and insufficient for my lungs. Even though our cell was enormous, it was obvious that we had used up a large part of the oxygen it contained, for it is a known fact that in 1 hour a man uses up the oxygen contained in 100 liters of air, and that this air, which then holds an almost equal quantity of carbon dioxide, becomes unbreathable. It was therefore urgent that the air in our prison be renewed, along with undoubtedly all the air in the submarine. This gave rise to a question in my mind. How did the commander of the submarine solve this problem? Did he obtain his air chemically, releasing the oxygen contained in potassium chlorate by means of heat and absorbing the carbon dioxide with potassium lye? In this case, he must have kept up some contact with dry land in order to get the chemicals needed for this operation. Or did he merely store air under pressure in reservoirs and then feed it out according to the needs of his crew? Perhaps. Or, and this process would be the easiest, cheapest, and therefore the most likely, did he merely come to the surface to breathe like whales and thus replenish his air supply every 24 hours? In any case, whatever method he used, it seemed to me the time had come to put it into operation without delay. In fact, I was already obliged to speed up my breathing in order to make use of the little oxygen remaining in the room, when I suddenly felt refreshed by a current of pure air containing a strong smell of salt. It was sea air, revivifying and full of iodine. I opened my mouth wide and allowed my lungs to soak it up. At the same time, I felt a movement, a slight but undeniable rolling. The steel-plated monster of a ship had evidently come to the surface to breathe, just like a whale. Its method of respiration was therefore now a matter of certainty. When my lungs had soaked up enough of this pure air, I tried to find the aeriferous conduit, if you will, which had brought us this life-giving oxygen, and I soon found it. Above the door there was a ventilating hole through which passed a column of fresh air, thus renewing the impoverished atmosphere of our cell. I had gotten to this point in my investigations when Ned and Conseil woke up almost at the same time, undoubtedly because of the fresh air that had entered the room. They rubbed their eyes, stretched, and were on their feet in an instant. "Did Monsieur sleep well?" Conseil asked with his usual politeness. "Very well, thank you," I answered. "And you, Ned?" "Very soundly, Professor. I may be wrong, but it seems to me as if I'm breathing sea air." Sailors don't make mistakes about such things, and I told the Canadian what had happened while he was asleep. "Good," he said. "That accounts for the roaring we heard when the so-called narwhal was inside of the Abraham Lincoln." "Right, Ned, it was breathing." "The only trouble, Monsieur Aronnax, is that I have no idea what time it is, unless maybe it's lunchtime." "Lunchtime, Ned? Breakfast time would be more accurate, for I'm sure this is already the following day." "That would mean," said Conseil, "that we've slept for 24 hours. "I think so," I answered. "I won't argue with you," retorted Ned Land. "Whether it's lunch or breakfast, the steward will be more than welcome, whichever he wants to bring." "Perhaps he'll bring both," said Conseil. "Fine," replied the Canadian. "We have a right to 2 meals, and as for me, I could polish them both off without any trouble at all." "In any case, Ned, let's wait," I answered. "It's obvious these people don't intend to let us die of starvation, otherwise that last meal wouldn't make any sense." "Unless it was just to fatten us up," exclaimed Ned. Come, I said. "We haven't fallen into the hands of cannibals." "One time doesn't make it a custom," the Canadian answered seriously. "Who knows whether these people haven't gone a long time without fresh meat, and as a result 3 healthy, well-built individuals like the professor, his servant, and myself—" "Put such ideas out of your mind, Ned," I replied, "and above all, don't let such ideas make you lose your temper against our hosts and thus make our situation that much worse." Anyway, said the harpooner, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse, and I don't see either lunch or breakfast turning up. Ned, I said, we have to conform to the rules on board, and I imagine our appetites are running faster than the cook's watch. Well, then, we'll have to set ours by his, said Conseil calmly. That's you all over, Conseil, my friend, retorted the impatient Canadian. You never get riled up. Always calm. You'd be capable of thanking God before saying grace and then dying of starvation rather than complaining. What good would it do? Asked Conseil. Complaining doesn't have to do any good. It's enough all by itself. And if these pirates, I say pirates out of respect to the professor and so as not to annoy him since he won't allow me to call them cannibals, if these pirates think that they're going to keep me in this stifling cage without hearing me let loose with some of my swearing, they're making a big mistake. Come now, Monsieur Aronnax, tell me frankly, do you think they're going to keep us cooped up for long in this iron box? To tell you the truth, Ned, I don't know any more than you do. But what would be your guess? My guess is that quite by chance we've stumbled on a very important secret. Now, if the crew of the submarine wants to keep this secret, and if this is more important to them than the lives of 3 men, I think our chances of survival are slim. If this is not the case, the monster which has swallowed us up will, at the first opportunity, return us to the world inhabited by our fellow men. Unless they enroll us in the crew, said Conseil, and thus keep us. Until some frigate, interrupted Ned Land, that's faster and more maneuverable than the Abraham Lincoln captures this pirate's den and makes its crew and us along with it walk the plank. Perhaps you're right, Ned, I replied, but as far as I know, nobody has yet made us any propositions along this line, so it's useless discussing what we should do in such and such a situation. I repeat, let's wait and see what happens, and in the meanwhile, just sit still, for there's nothing we can do anyway. No, Professor, replied the harpooner, refusing to give up. We have to do something. Do what, Ned? Escape. Escaping from prisons on land is difficult enough, but from an underwater prison it would seem to me completely out of the question. All right, Ned, asked Conseil. What do you have to say to that? I can't imagine an American ever at a loss for something to say. The harpooner, visibly embarrassed, remained silent. Under the conditions in which fate had placed us, escape was absolutely impossible, but a Canadian is partly a Frenchman, and one could see this clearly in his answer. Well, Monsieur Aronnax, he said after several moments' thought, do you know what people do when there's no way out of a jail? No, Ned. It's simple. They just make sure they stay there. Good for you, cried Conseil. It's better being inside one than above it or below it. But only after tossing out the jailers, wardens, and guards, added Ned Land. What? Ned, you're thinking seriously of taking over this ship? Very seriously, answered the Canadian. But that would be impossible. Why, Professor? If we get the opportunity, I don't see why we shouldn't take advantage of it. If there are only about 20 men on board this ship, that shouldn't frighten 2 Frenchmen and a Canadian, should it? It was best to agree with the harpooner rather than start another discussion, so I only answered, let's see what happens, Ned, and then decide. But until such time, please try and be a little more patient. Our only chance lies in some kind of a ruse, and if you keep losing your temper, we'll never have the slightest chance of fooling them. So promise me you'll try to accept our situation without getting so angry. I promise, Professor, replied Ned in a not too reassuring tone. I won't do or say a thing to show them how I feel, even when meals aren't served up as regularly as we would like. So I can have your word of honor, Ned? Answered the Canadian. Then the conversation stopped, and each one of us became lost in his own thoughts. I must admit that as far as I was concerned, in spite of the harpooner's confidence, I held out little hope. I couldn't see where we would get the opportunity Ned Land mentioned. In order to be operated as it was, this submarine needed a large crew, and this meant that if we had to fight it out, we would be too strongly outnumbered. Moreover, first of all, we had to be free, and we weren't. I could see no means of escaping from a cell so hermetically sealed as the one we were in, and whatever secrets the strange captain of this ship wanted to keep, and this was undoubtedly the case, he would never let us wander about freely on board. Now, would he get rid of us by some violent means, or would he just let us off? Or would he just let us off on some bit of land? That was what we didn't know. Either of these theories seemed plausible, and one had to be a harpooner to entertain ideas of gaining our freedom by force. Moreover, I realized that Ned Land was becoming more and more embittered as he brooded over his situation. I began to hear him mumbling swear words, and his gestures once again became menacing. He would get up, pace about like a wild animal in a cage, and strike the wall with his fists and feet. Besides, after such a long wait, we were beginning to feel violent pangs of hunger, and this time the steward did not appear. And for people with good intentions, the crew seemed to be taking a very long time supplying our needs. Ned Land, tormented by the gnawing sensation in his stomach, was getting more and more worked up, and in spite of his having given me his word, I was afraid he might not be able to restrain himself if some member of the crew came in. For 2 more hours, Ned Land's temper got worse and worse. He shouted and yelled, but all in vain. The steel-plated walls were deaf. I couldn't even hear any noise inside the boat. It seemed deaf. It wasn't moving, for I would obviously have felt it vibrate beneath the pulse of the propeller. It was undoubtedly lying deep in the ocean and no longer belonged to life on Earth. All this dreary silence was frightening. As for our being abandoned and isolated in our cell, I had no idea how long it would last. The hopes I had felt after our interview with the captain were slowly vanishing. His gentle look, generous face, noble bearing were all beginning to disappear from my memory. I now saw this mysterious person as he really must have been, pitiless and cruel. I saw him as being a stranger to all human feelings, inaccessible to emotions of pity, and the implacable enemy of his fellow man, toward whom he had sworn an everlasting hatred. But it was this man that might let us die of starvation, locked up in this narrow prison, exposed to those horrible temptations brought on by fierce hunger. This awful thought took a hold of my mind and imagination, and I felt myself overcome by a terrible feeling of horror. Conseil remained calm. Ned Land was roaring. Just then we heard a noise outside. There was a sound of footsteps on the metal floor. Bolts were pulled. The door opened, and the steward appeared. Before I could do anything to stop him, the Canadian rushed at the poor man and knocked him over, clutching his throat. The steward was choking in his powerful grip. Conseil was trying to loosen the harpooner's hands from his half-unconscious victim, and I was about to help him when suddenly I was nailed to the spot by the following words, spoken in French. "Calm down, Master Land, and you, Professor, please listen to me."